Please describe to me the feelings and sensations you experience when beating your son. Hi, baby. Okay, I'll meet you there. We're gonna have to cut this short, I'm afraid.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 245. Releasing on September 20 across the US in select theatres and on video on demand is Bloodline, a horror thriller that stars Seann William Scott as a guidance counsellor whose primal urge to kill is triggered upon the arrival of his newborn son. Bloody, stylish, and very topical, Bloodline approaches its many themes with a fearless heart and inquisitive mind. And joining me now to talk about Bloodline is the film's director, Henry Jacobson. Henry, I thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So it's really interesting. You came across this script. It was already at Blumhouse, the studio who made this film. And I was curious, what was the initial thing about this story that really spoke to you that this was a film that you wanted to direct?
Well, it was really simply was the basic premise: serial killer has a baby. That idea really stuck with me. As it happens, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and you know, I'm definitely a fan of serial killer subgenre and horror, obviously, and thrillers in general. So that idea is what really sparked with me, and you know, I wanted to take it in sort of a very different direction, but you know, I was like, this is interesting, and you know, I had some time to think about it, and ultimately sent it to my writing partner, Albert Fox Lerner, on this, and we had some long conversations about where we thought it could go. She also sort of sparked to that idea. She's also a mother, so. Yeah, I think it was that initial idea of how do we bring this into a family that you know was the most interesting element.
Also attached to the film at that time was Seann William Scott in the role of Evan. It's really inspired casting, I think. And he's an interesting actor in that, I don't know if you saw a couple of years ago, Seann William Scott was on the Rich Eisen show. It's a sports show, and they were riffing on thinking of alternate endings for sports movies, and he kept going into this really kind of dark territory. You know, imagine if Rudy died, you know, things like that. And it's clear to me that he's the type of actor that was really looking for darker material and something different for his career. Is that something that you definitely came across as well when you first met him?
Yeah, you know, it was you know, it was surprising. It turns out, is like a huge horror buff, and you know, really knew horror movies. So when we came on and you know, said we wanted to do it, the first step was I had to pitch Sean. He had to approve you know, me to come on, and you know, the version that we came to him with was pretty fucking dark. And even when we were working on it, we were like, "Oh, I'm sorry, can I say that?"
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Apologies, I'll watch my mouth. Okay. You know, we were like, I don't know, this is going to be too dark even for Blumhouse. You know, is he going to be into this? And he loved it. And throughout the process of working on it, on the script, you know, he was very involved, and we would send him every draft, and we would have long conversations, and without fail, every time we thought we were pushing the boundaries too much, he would say, "I love it. Can we make it darker? Let's go darker." And you know, so he was a real joy to work with.
You mentioned before that you are a father. I'm a father as well to two boys, and it's really, I think the really cool thing about your movie is that you delve right into the stress of those first few months of parenting. And I think it's a thing that parents have a connection with one another about. We've been in the trenches, you know, like we were there at 2 o'clock in the morning doing the bottle feeds for how many nights, and etc. And even this morning, I have a 4-year-old, my youngest is 4 years old. He has an earache, so I've been up since like 5 in the morning helping him out as well. It's something, it's just it's what we do. And I think what's really interesting in regards to the character of Evan is that I think as soon as our kids are born, we are injected with this fear that someone, you know, that we are the protector, that someone might hurt our children. Is that something that you guys really wanted to delve into in regards to the character of Evan? Is that as soon as this thing happens to him, his life-changing event, something just kind of triggers inside of him.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because that's one of the things about, particularly I think about being a father, that had never occurred to me. I never was a very fearful person, and I throughout my life I put myself in some very dangerous situations, sort of on purpose. I mean, in my background, even in work as a documentary filmmaker, I've worked in some very dangerous places, and only after having a child did I really start to become afraid of what could happen. And, as my other friends were having kids, that was something that became consistent in every other father that I talked to, is that, for me, I would start having these like very dark fantasies of horrible things happening that I had just never really had before, in a way. So that, was very true to the character that I was going through as we were writing it. When we turned in our final draft, I think my son was about 2 months old at that point. And yes, that fear that something is going to happen or that someone is going to hurt him was huge and was definitely a big part of it. And then, Avra is also, she's a mother. So when we were writing it, we really wanted to, in a lot of ways, this is a very sort of fantastical film, and it's very stylized and surreal in some places, but the experience of early parenthood is something that we wanted to be very truthful about, because I don't think a lot of movies are very honest about it. I think a lot of movies tend to kind of gloss over that period, and it's actually pretty hard, pretty brutal for a lot of people. Maybe not everybody, but for a lot of people, just by lack of sleep and the tension that puts on your marriage and the anxieties over, is your kid eating enough? Is he developing at the right, rate? There's all these things that we kind of become consumed with, that we thought was, one, really true, and two, fed into, a horror movie, fed into a sense of tension and anxiety and fear that actually set us up really well to get into a slasher movie. So that was really important to both of us.
For myself, when it comes to a great horror film or slasher film, maybe just in films in general, I think you really need to have two kind of components. Number one, you need to have stakes on the table. You need to have some type of emotional stakes, particularly, which this film does have plenty of. What I really love about this film is that it also has really good horror movie beats. I sometimes I compare movies to like music compositions. It has to hit the right notes at the right time, and I think horror movies especially do that. Number one, would you agree with my assertion on that? And number two, if you do, where do those beats kind of come in? Is that inherent in the script, or is that something that really comes in post-production?
Absolutely, I agree with you, and I've actually thought of it in those terms too. Like, one of the things, the comparisons, I think, particularly with horror, but with filmmaking, is that you can compare to music is the rests, right?
Yeah.
The rest in a musical score is just as important as the note that comes after it, and I think that's the same in filmmaking, is those moments of stillness, and those moments that allow, are often, again, particularly in horror, the scariest moments. And I think particularly with a movie like this, where the anxiety is really coming from kind of getting inside the mind of the lead character, inside the mind of the serial killer, those quiet moments are in some cases the scariest. And they also, I think, set up those moments of brutality, so yes, I do think that musical analogy is spot on, and I think in terms of that timing question, the scares, quote unquote. I mean, this isn't really a jump scare movie, but the scares and the violence do come as these really sudden, kind of sharp crescendos that then we move through very quickly. So, I do think that's a really apt comparison, and it is something that I think about a lot, and something, I guess to answer your question about where that comes from in the process, it's really both. Definitely in the writing of the script, we thought a lot about pacing, and there's some editorial choices that we make that are these very sort of fast rhythmic sections that are written that way. That we wrote these to be the sort of quick cut kind of shot kind of moments that would kind of jump off the page so that the reader would understand what we were going for, and then that only gets enhanced, and really you sort of find it in the edit and in the sound design, and also obviously working with score influences that enormously.
Yeah, and you guys have a great score in this movie as well, just to put it out there as well. Final question here. I'm just curious, working for Blumhouse, they have gone from strength to strength over the years. They have become the pioneering premier horror thriller brand. When you work for this studio, I'm curious, is there a set of philosophies, guidelines in regards to working with that company? I know they're very there's a budget thing there. When you want to get your films to a certain budget, but is there other things as well that you have to live up to with the Blumhouse brand, or do you have creative freedom to make whatever film you want to make?
I think one of the great advantages of their budget structure, and particularly this fell into their low, but their sort of ultra low category because it was just $1 million budget, is that they allow you to have that creative. The risk isn't as great as if you were working on a $20 million movie with a big studio. So they, and I think every filmmaker that's worked with them would say this. They give you an incredible amount of creative freedom. They certainly are involved in shaping the story, and they give notes. And we went through, we submitted an outline that they give notes on. We had meetings and certainly lots of conversations, as you would. But there was never a time where they were like, "Do it this way," or "We pull the plug," or anything like that. Anything that they said was always just with the goal of making me think about it more. And in most cases, it led to a more interesting idea than where what I had at the beginning of it. So, they're great to work with. This was actually the third time I had worked with them, the first two being on documentary and unscripted projects with, on the TV side, which is a whole other beast. But yeah, creatively, they're really a dream to work with, because once they kind of say, okay, green light, go, they kind of let you do what you want. And all along the way, we kept being like, there's no way, even in the script process, like, there's no way they're going to let us do this scene, right? There's no way they're going to let us do this scene the way we want it. And then when they started getting scenes, I was like, there's no way they're going to let us keep this in the movie. But all along the way, they did. And they wanted to push it in as sort of strange and darker direction as I wanted to take it.
So for everyone listening out there, September 20 in US in select theaters, and also on video on demand, Bloodline, starring Seann William Scott. I put this film, Henry, in the category of the thinking man's horror movie. It really does. It's one of those films that really grips you with its filmmaking, with its performances, but makes you think afterwards. And I think that's the sign of a great film and a great filmmaker. So congratulations to you, Henry, and best of luck with the release of the film.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's really a pleasure to talk to you.